I never thought the end of my marriage would begin with someone else's story. But that's exactly what happened on a Tuesday evening in March, when my wife Leah came home from work with an unusual brightness in her eyes and a tale that would unravel everything I thought I knew about our life together. "You won't believe what happened at work today," she said, setting down her purse with more force than necessary. The sound echoed in our kitchen, where I was reviewing production reports from the manufacturing plant I managed. I looked up from my laptop. After 9 years of marriage, I'd learned to read Leah's moods like weather patterns. Tonight felt different, charged with an energy I couldn't quite place. "Try me," I said, closing the laptop to give her my full attention. She pulled out a chair and sat across from me, her dark hair falling around her face as she leaned forward. "So, you know Emma from accounting?" I nodded, though I'd never met Emma personally. Leah worked as an HR coordinator at Sullivan and Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm downtown, and she often brought home stories about her colleagues. It was one of the things I appreciated about our relationship. We shared the details of our daily lives without reservation. "Well," Leah continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "Emma discovered that Derek has been cheating on her." The name Derek meant nothing to me, but I made the appropriate sympathetic noise. "That's terrible. How did she find out?" "She found text messages on his phone," Leah said, and there was something in her tone that made me look at her more closely. She seemed almost excited. Apparently, he'd been sloppy about deleting them. Messages from some woman named Sarah, talking about meeting at hotels, buying jewelry together. Emma even found receipts in his wallet, a diamond bracelet from Trevino's Jewelers, room charges from the Hampton Inn on Riverside. I frowned. The level of detail seemed oddly specific. "She told you all this?" "We had lunch together. She was devastated, Gabriel. Absolutely devastated." Leah's hands moved as she spoke, gesturing in a way that seemed too animated for secondhand tragedy. 23 years of marriage down the drain because Derek couldn't keep it in his pants. The crude language surprised me. Leah typically chose her words more carefully, especially when discussing other people's pain. "What's she going to do?" I asked. "That's the thing," Leah said, leaning back in her chair. "She's not sure. Part of her wants to confront him immediately, but another part thinks she should gather more evidence first. She asked me what I thought you would do if you were in Derek's position." I blinked. "If I were in Derek's position? You mean if I were cheating?" "No, no," Leah said quickly. "If you were Derek, if you were the one who got caught, what would you say? How would you try to explain it?" The question felt strange, hypothetical in a way that made me uncomfortable. But I answered honestly, the way I always did with Leah. "I guess I'd probably try to minimize it at first," I said slowly. "Maybe claim it wasn't serious, that it didn't mean anything. If that didn't work, I might try to blame her somehow. Say the marriage was already in trouble, that I was lonely or whatever." Leah nodded, as if taking mental notes. "And if she said she might forgive you? If she was willing to work through it?" "Then I'd probably promise to end it immediately and go to counseling," I said. "Though honestly, Leah, I can't imagine being in that situation. The idea of betraying your trust—" I shook my head. "It's not something I could live with." "But hypothetically," she pressed, "if you had already crossed that line and I found out, and I was willing to forgive you, what would that mean to you?" I studied her face, trying to understand why she was pushing this particular line of questioning. "I suppose it would mean I'd gotten incredibly lucky, that I was married to someone with more grace and forgiveness than I deserved. Something flickered across her expression. Satisfaction, maybe, or relief. Emma asked me to ask you because she thinks Derek might try all those tactics. She wants to be prepared. That made sense, I supposed. Leah was good at reading people, and I'd always been logical about human behavior. It was part of what made us work well together. Her emotional intelligence paired with my analytical approach. Well, tell Emma that if she's already found concrete evidence, she should probably prepare for exactly those responses, I said, and remind her that actions matter more than words. If Derek is truly sorry, he'll prove it through his behavior, not just his promises. Leah smiled then, a bright expression that seemed almost triumphant. I'll tell her exactly that. The conversation moved on to other topics. My day at the plant, weekend plans, a movie we'd been meaning to watch. But something about the Derek and Emma story lingered in my mind. Maybe it was the way Leah had told it, with such vivid detail and personal investment. Or maybe it was the specific nature of her hypothetical questions. 2 days later, everything became clear. I was having lunch at Rossetti's, a family Italian place near the plant, with Frank Russo, one of my quality control supervisors. Frank and I had worked together for 6 years, and we'd developed the kind of easy friendship that exists between men who respect each other's work ethic. He was reliable, methodical, and absolutely devoted to his wife Diana. Which is why I was surprised when he walked into the restaurant looking like he hadn't slept in days. "You look terrible," I said as he slid into the booth across from me. Frank rubbed his face with both hands. "I feel terrible. Diana and we're having some serious problems." I set down my sandwich. Frank rarely discussed personal issues, and when he did, it was usually with the same measured approach he brought to quality inspections. "What's going on?" "I think she's having an affair," he said quietly. "No, I know she is. I found evidence last night." My stomach dropped. Evidence? Text messages on her phone. She left it charging in the kitchen, and a message popped up from some guy named James. Something about meeting at their usual place. Frank's voice was strained. So I looked through the rest of the messages. This has been going on for months, Gabriel. Months. I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. What kind of messages? Intimate stuff. Plans to meet at the Hampton Inn on Riverside. References to jewelry he bought her. A diamond bracelet from Trevino's Jewelers. Frank's hands were shaking slightly. 23 years of marriage, and she throws it away for some guy named James. The blood drained from my face. The Hampton Inn on Riverside. Trevino's Jewelers. A diamond bracelet. 23 years of marriage. The exact details Leah had told me 2 days earlier, supposedly about her co-worker Emma and Emma's husband Derek. "Frank," I said carefully, "when did you discover this?" "Last night. Wednesday night. I couldn't sleep afterward, kept going through everything in my head." Wednesday night. But Leah had told me Emma's story on Tuesday evening, presenting it as something that had already happened, something Emma had already discovered and shared during their lunch. Which meant either Leah was psychic, or she had known about Diana's affair before Frank himself knew about it. My mind raced through the implications. There were only a few ways Leah could have known those specific details before Frank discovered them. Either she knew Diana personally, which she'd never mentioned, or she was somehow connected to the affair itself. "I'm sorry, Frank," I managed to say. That's devastating." He nodded miserably. "I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to confront her, but another part thinks I should gather more evidence first. What would you do? The question hit me like a physical blow. It was the same question Leah had claimed Emma asked, only now I knew Emma didn't exist. The whole story had been a lie, a test case presented to gauge my reactions. I think, I said slowly, you should be very careful about how you proceed. Make sure you have all the facts before you make any decisions. It was good advice, and I intended to follow it myself. That evening, I sat in my car outside our house for 10 minutes before going inside. I needed to think, to process what I'd learned without letting my emotions show on my face. Leah was intelligent and observant. If I came in rattled, she'd notice immediately. The house smelled like the chicken parmesan she'd made for dinner, one of my favorites. She greeted me with a kiss and asked about my day, the same routine we'd followed for years. Everything appeared normal, domestic, comfortable. Except now I knew it was all built on deception. "How was lunch with Frank?" she asked as we sat down to eat. The question seemed innocent, but I heard the underlying interest. She knew Frank, had met him at company gatherings. More importantly, she apparently knew his wife. "Fine," I said. "He seemed a little stressed about work lately." I watched her face carefully, but she gave no sign that she knew anything about Frank's personal crisis. Either she was an excellent actress, or she genuinely didn't know that Frank had discovered Diana's affair. "Oh, that reminds me," she said, cutting her chicken. "I talked to Emma again today, about her situation with Derek." Here we go, I thought. How is she doing? Better, I think. She's decided to confront him this weekend. She wanted me to ask you, if Derek denies everything at first, even when she shows him the evidence, what would that tell you about his character? I set down my fork. What kind of evidence does she have? The text messages, the jewelry receipts, the hotel charges. Pretty solid proof, right? Right, I said. And if he still denies it after seeing that proof, I'd say it tells you he's not just unfaithful. He's a coward. Someone who lies even when the truth is staring him in the face. Leah nodded approvingly. That's what I told her. That denial in the face of clear evidence shows a fundamental lack of integrity. The irony was almost overwhelming. Here was my wife, lying to my face about a fictional coworker, while simultaneously getting me to condemn the very behavior she was modeling. "What else did Emma want to know?" I asked. She asked about forgiveness. If Derek comes clean and begs for another chance, promises to end the affair and go to counseling, should she consider it? I studied Leah's face. There was an intensity there, a focus that went beyond casual interest in a friend's problem. That depends, I said carefully. Does she still love him? Does she think the marriage is worth saving? She says she does. Love him, I mean. But she's not sure if she can ever trust him again. Trust is everything in a marriage, I said. Without it, you don't really have a partnership. You just have two people living in the same house, pretending everything is okay. Something flickered in Leah's expression. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. But people can rebuild trust, can't they? She asked. If someone makes a mistake, even a big one, can a marriage survive that? I think it depends on the mistake, I said, and whether the person is truly sorry or just sorry they got caught. How would you tell the difference? Actions, I said. Words are cheap. If someone is truly remorseful, they'll do whatever it takes to prove they deserve another chance. Complete transparency, cutting off all contact with the other person, counseling, whatever their spouse needs to feel secure again. Leah was quiet for a moment, pushing food around her plate. What if the affair wasn't planned? She asked finally. What if it just happened? Someone was feeling lonely or unappreciated, and they made a bad decision that spiraled out of control. Now we were getting to the heart of it. This wasn't about Emma's fictional marriage anymore. This was about something real, something that was affecting my wife deeply enough that she'd created an elaborate deception to explore it. Leah, I said gently, is there something you want to tell me? Her head snapped up, eyes wide. What do you mean? You seem very invested in Emma's situation, more invested than I'd expect for a casual work friend. I feel sorry for her, Leah said quickly. It's a terrible thing to go through. I wanted to push further, to ask directly if she knew Deanna Russo, if there was more to this story than she was telling me. But something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of what I might learn, or maybe it was the recognition that I needed more information before I made any accusations. Instead, I reached across the table and took her hand. You know you can tell me anything, right? I said. Whatever it is, we can work through it together. For a moment, I thought she might confess. Her eyes filled with tears and her hand trembled in mine. Then she pulled away and smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. Of course, she said. There's nothing to work through. I'm just worried about Emma. But as we finished dinner and settled in to watch television, I noticed she kept checking her phone. And when she thought I wasn't looking, her expression was anxious, almost fearful. Something was happening. Something that involved Deanna Russo's affair and my wife's suspicious knowledge of details she shouldn't have known. I needed to find out what it was. The next day at work, I couldn't concentrate on the production schedules and quality reports that usually demanded my full attention. Instead, I found myself thinking about connections. How Leah might know Deanna Russo. What circumstances could have given her advanced knowledge of the affair? During my lunch break, I drove to Leah's office building. Sullivan and Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass tower downtown, and I'd been there several times for company parties and spouse events. The lobby was busy with the usual flow of business people, but I wasn't there to see Leah. I was there to see if Emma from accounting actually existed. The building directory listed all the companies by floor, but didn't include individual employee names. That was fine. I had a different approach in mind. I took the elevator to the 7th floor, where Sullivan and Associates had their reception area. The receptionist, a young woman named Kelly who I'd met at the Christmas party, looked up with surprise when she saw me. Gabriel, what a nice surprise. Are you here to see Leah? Actually, I said, trying to sound casual, I'm here to drop something off for Emma in accounting. Leah asked me to stop by since I was in the area. Kelly's expression became confused. Emma in accounting? I'm sorry, but we don't have an Emma in accounting. Our accounting department is just Marcus and Janet, and they've been our only accounting staff for 3 years. My heart sank, even though this was what I'd expected to hear. Oh, I said, feigning confusion. Maybe I misunderstood. Leah mentioned someone named Emma who was having some personal problems, and I thought she said accounting. There's an Emma Rodriguez in marketing, Kelly offered helpfully, and Emma Walsh in IT support. Would one of them be who you're looking for? Maybe Emma Rodriguez, I said. Is she married to someone named Derek? Kelly shook her head. Emma Rodriguez is single, and Emma Walsh is married to a woman named Jennifer. I'm sorry, but I don't think we have any Emmas married to Derek's. I thanked Kelly and left the building, my suspicions confirmed. Emma didn't exist, which meant Leah's entire story was fabricated. But why? What was she trying to accomplish by creating this fictional scenario and testing my responses to it? As I drove back to the plant, I thought about the timing. Frank had discovered Diana's affair on Wednesday night, but Leah had told me about it on Tuesday evening, framing it as Emma's story. That meant Leah had known about the affair before the betrayed husband himself knew about it. There were only a few explanations for that kind of advance knowledge. Either Leah knew Diana personally and Diana had confided in her about the affair, or Leah was somehow connected to the affair itself. Given that Leah had never mentioned knowing anyone named Diana, and that she'd gone to elaborate lengths to disguise the story's true source, I was beginning to suspect the latter. That evening, I watched Leah more carefully than I had in years. She seemed nervous, checking her phone frequently and startling when it buzzed with notifications. During dinner, she asked more questions about Emma's fictional situation. "I was thinking about what you said yesterday," she began, twirling pasta around her fork. "About trust being everything in a marriage. What about it? Do you really think it's impossible to rebuild trust after an affair, even if the person was truly sorry?" I considered my words carefully. "I think it's possible, but it would be incredibly difficult. The betrayed spouse would have to be willing to forgive, and the cheating spouse would have to be willing to do whatever it took to earn that forgiveness." "What would that look like exactly?" "Complete honesty, access to phones, emails, social media accounts, regular counseling, cutting off all contact with the affair partner. Basically, the cheating spouse would have to give up their privacy and independence until trust was rebuilt." Leah was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like a lot to ask of someone." "It's a lot less than what they took from their spouse," I said firmly. "When you cheat, you don't just betray your partner. You destroy their sense of security, their ability to trust their own judgment. Rebuilding that takes time and effort." "But what if the cheating spouse felt trapped? What if they had made a mistake and wanted to end it, but couldn't figure out how?" I set down my fork and looked at her directly. "Leah, what's really going on here? This is the third day you've brought up Emma's situation, and every conversation feels more personal than the last." She avoided my eyes. "I told you, I'm just trying to help a friend." "What's Emma's last name?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Emma from accounting. What's her last name? How long has she worked at Sullivan and Associates? What department does Derek work for?" Leah's face went pale. She asked me not to share too many details. For privacy reasons." "Leah, I went to your office today. There is no Emma in accounting. Kelly told me the accounting department only has Marcus and Janet." The color drained completely from her face. For a long moment, we stared at each other across our dinner table, the comfortable routine of our marriage suddenly feeling like a performance. "You checked up on me," she whispered. "I verified a story that didn't make sense," I said calmly, "and found out it was completely fabricated. So I'll ask you again. What's really going on?" Leah's hands were shaking now. She set down her fork and pressed her palms flat against the table. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "I don't know what to think," I replied. "But I know you've been lying to me for 3 days straight. So why don't you tell me what it actually is?" She was quiet for so long that I began to wonder if she was going to answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I've been talking to some friends. Women who've been through similar situations. They formed a support group to help each other deal with relationship problems. What kind of relationship problems? Marriages that have lost their spark, husbands who are focused on their careers and neglecting their wives, women who feel invisible in their own homes. I felt a chill run down my spine. Are you saying you feel invisible in our home? You got promoted 6 months ago, she said, still not looking at me. You're working longer hours, bringing home more responsibility. You talk about the plant constantly, about production numbers and efficiency metrics and personnel issues. When was the last time you asked me about my job? When was the last time you noticed I got my hair cut or bought a new dress? The accusation hit harder than I expected because there was truth in it. My promotion to operations manager had come with significantly more responsibility, and I had been bringing work stress home more often lately. I'm sorry if I've been distracted, I said. But that doesn't explain why you made up a story about Emma and Derek. What were you really trying to find out? Leah finally looked up, her eyes filled with tears. The support group. Some of the women have been in situations where their husbands cheated. They said the way a man reacts when you first tell him about infidelity, even someone else's infidelity, tells you a lot about his character. So you were testing me. I was trying to understand what kind of person I married, she said. Whether you were the kind of man who would blame the victim or make excuses for the cheater. I stared at her, struggling to process what she was telling me. And what did you conclude? That you're a good man, she whispered. That you believe in honesty and faithfulness and working through problems together. Then why do you look terrified right now? She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. Between the tears, I caught fragments of explanation. The support group, pressure from other women, fear about our changing relationship dynamic, worry that my career success would eventually lead me to stray. But even as she cried and apologized for deceiving me, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The specific details about Diana Russo's affair, the timing of Leah's knowledge, the elaborate nature of the deception, it all seemed like overkill for a simple relationship test. I held her while she cried, but my mind was racing. If Leah was part of a support group for women with relationship problems, and if she'd known about Diana's affair before Frank discovered it, what did that say about her connection to the situation? Over the weekend, I made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable a week earlier. I was going to investigate my own wife. It started small, paying closer attention to her phone habits, noting when she went out and with whom, observing her emotional state and stress levels. What I found was troubling. Leah was receiving text messages at all hours, often stepping out of the room to read and respond to them. She'd started going to evening book club meetings twice a week, events she'd never mentioned before the Emma story began. And her explanations for these activities were vague and inconsistent. When I asked about the book club, she said they were reading relationship self-help books. When I asked which books, she mentioned titles I'd never seen around the house. When I asked about other members, she gave first names only and changed the subject quickly. The most telling sign was her mood after these evening meetings. She'd come home wired and emotional, either unusually affectionate or strangely distant. It reminded me of how she'd acted when telling me about Emma and Derek, energized by drama that wasn't quite her own. On Tuesday evening, exactly 1 week after the original Emma story, I made a decision that felt like a betrayal of everything I'd believed about our marriage. I followed her. Leah left the house at 7:30, telling me she was going to book club at Sarah Kim's house. Sarah was married to my coworker Jim, And while we'd socialized with them at company events, I'd never heard Leah mention being particularly close to Sarah. Instead of heading to the Kim subdivision, Leah drove downtown to a coffee shop called Meridian Beans. I parked across the street and watched as she went inside, my heart pounding with the realization that I was spying on my own wife. 10 minutes later, she emerged with a tall man I didn't recognize. He was well-dressed, probably in his 40s, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested success in business or professional settings. They walked to his car, a BMW sedan, and drove away together. I followed at a distance, feeling like a character in a bad movie. They went to Luigi's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place Leah and I went for anniversaries and special occasions. I sat in my car outside the restaurant for 45 minutes, wrestling with what I'd discovered. My wife was on what appeared to be a date with another man, having lied about her destination and purpose for the evening. When they emerged, they stood close together outside the restaurant, and he kissed her cheek before they separated. She returned to her car, and I followed her home, arriving several minutes after she did. "How was book club?" I asked when she came inside. "Good," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We had an interesting discussion about communication and relationships." The casual lie hit me like a physical blow. After 9 years of marriage, after everything we'd built together, she could look me in the eye and lie without apparent difficulty. I excused myself to go to bed early, claiming a headache. In reality, I needed time to think, to process what I'd learned and decide what to do next. Lying in the dark while Leah showered, I thought about Frank Russo and his discovery of Diana's affair. I thought about the specific details Leah had somehow known in advance. And I thought about the man I'd seen her with tonight, the easy familiarity between them, the goodbye kiss that suggested intimacy. My wife was having an affair. That much seemed clear. But there was still something about the timing and the details that didn't quite add up. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the courthouse. If I was going to confront Leah with evidence of her infidelity, I wanted to make sure I had all the facts. And if she was going to lie to my face, I wanted to be prepared for whatever came next. I hired a private investigator named Maria Santos, a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases. Maria was professional, discreet, and brutally honest about what her services could and couldn't accomplish. "I can document her activities, identify who she's seeing, and provide you with evidence that would hold up in divorce proceedings," she said during our consultation. "But I can't tell you why she's doing it or whether your marriage can be saved. Those are questions you'll have to answer for yourself." I authorized a comprehensive investigation, surveillance, background checks on known associates, analysis of phone and credit card records. It felt like the most expensive decision I'd ever made, but I needed to know the full scope of what I was dealing with. "How long will it take?" I asked. 2 weeks should give us a complete picture," Maria said. "Unless you want to confront her sooner based on what you already know." I shook my head. I want all the facts first. If I'm going to blow up my marriage, I want to make sure I'm doing it for the right reasons. That evening, Leah seemed more relaxed than she'd been in days. She made my favorite dinner, asked about my work, and suggested we watch a movie together. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that I'd been wrong about the restaurant, that there was an innocent explanation for what I'd seen. Then her phone buzzed with a text message, and I saw her expression change. She read the message quickly and deleted it, then excused herself to use the bathroom. When she came back, she was distracted and distant, checking her phone every few minutes. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just work stuff." Another lie, delivered with the same casual ease as all the others. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived in a strange state of suspended reality. During the day, I managed the manufacturing plant, attended meetings, and solved production problems. In the evening, I came home to a wife who was lying to me about fundamental aspects of her life, and I pretended everything was normal. Leah continued attending her mysterious evening meetings, always with different explanations. Book club at Sarah's, girls' night with college friends, volunteer work at a local charity. She was careful never to use the same story twice, but the pattern was consistent. 2 or 3 evenings per week, always returning home with the same wired, emotional energy. Meanwhile, Maria's reports began painting a picture that was both clearer and more complex than I'd expected. Yes, Leah was having an affair. The man from the restaurant was named James Crawford, a marketing executive at a downtown firm. But he wasn't just her affair partner. He was also involved with at least 2 other women, including Diana Russo. According to Maria's investigation, there was indeed a support group of sorts, but it wasn't what Leah had described. Instead of women dealing with relationship problems, it was a network of wives who were all involved with the same man. They knew about each other, covered for each other, and apparently shared information about their husbands' potential reactions to infidelity. The Emma story suddenly made perfect sense. Leah had known about Diana's affair because she was part of the same network. When Frank discovered Diana's infidelity on Wednesday night, Leah had already heard all the details from Diana herself and had used those details to create a fictional test case for me. But the most disturbing revelation was still to come. According to Maria's research, the network operated with a specific philosophy. Successful men inevitably cheat, so successful wives should secure their own options before they're abandoned for younger women. The group encouraged testing their husbands' reactions to hypothetical infidelity scenarios, gathering intelligence about potential divorce settlements, and maintaining emotional and physical affairs as insurance policies. Leah wasn't just cheating. She was part of an organized system designed to prepare wives for the anticipated failure of their marriages. "How many women are involved?" I asked Maria during our final meeting. "At least 6 that I've identified," she said, sliding a folder of photographs and documents across the table. "All married to successful men, all involved with James Crawford, all sharing information and covering for each other's activities." I opened the folder and saw photos of Leah with James, Diana with James, and several other women I didn't recognize. The documentation was comprehensive: restaurant receipts, hotel registrations, text message logs, financial records. "What about the husbands?" I asked. "Do any of them know?" "Frank Russo discovered his wife's affair, but he doesn't know about the network aspect yet. The others appear to be unaware." I studied the photos, feeling a mixture of rage and sadness. In some of them, Leah looked happier than I'd seen her in months. In others, she appeared anxious, almost guilty. "What's your recommendation?" I asked. Maria leaned back in her chair. "That depends on what you want to accomplish. If your goal is to end the marriage with maximum financial advantage, we have enough evidence to achieve that. If your goal is to save the marriage, you'll need to address not just the affair but the entire belief system that led to it." "What do you mean?" "Your wife believes that successful men inevitably cheat and abandon their wives," Maria explained. "She's acting on that belief by securing what she sees as necessary backup plans. Unless you can convince her that her assumptions are wrong, ending this affair won't solve the underlying problem." I left the meeting with a folder full of evidence and a choice to make. I could confront Leah immediately with proof of her betrayal, or I could try to understand why she'd been driven to such extreme deception. That evening, I found her in the kitchen, preparing dinner with unusual care. She'd made lamb with rosemary, one of my favorites, and set the table with our good china. "What's the occasion?" I asked. "No occasion," she said, but there was something forced about her cheerfulness. "I just wanted to do something nice for us." As we ate, she asked questions about my work, my plans for the weekend, my thoughts about taking a vacation together. It felt like she was trying to reconnect, to rebuild something that had been damaged. "Leah," I said finally, "do you remember the story you told me about Emma and Derek?" Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Of course. Why?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about testing someone's character by seeing how they react to stories about infidelity." "What about it?" I pulled out my phone and showed her one of Maria's photos, Leah and James Crawford holding hands outside Luigi's restaurant. Her face went completely white. The fork fell from her hand and clattered against her plate. "Gabriel," she whispered. "I know about James," I said calmly. "I know about Deanna Russo and the other women. I know about the support group and the philosophy behind it. What I don't know is why." She started to cry then, but they weren't the tears of someone who'd been caught in a lie. They were tears of relief, as if she'd been carrying a burden too heavy to bear alone. "How long have you known?" she asked. "I suspected something after Frank told me about Diana's affair. The details matched your Emma story too perfectly for coincidence." "Frank? Frank Russo from your plant?" I nodded. "Diana is his wife. When he told me about discovering her affair, he used the exact same details you'd shared about Emma. The hotel, the jewelry store, the text messages, even the 23 years of marriage. It was impossible unless you'd known about Diana's situation before Frank discovered it." Leah closed her eyes. "I never meant for this to happen." "Which part? The affair or getting caught?" "Any of it," she said. "The whole thing started innocently. I met Diana at the gym, and we became friends. She was struggling in her marriage, feeling like her husband took her for granted. I was feeling the same way about us." "So you started a support group?" "Not exactly. Diana introduced me to some other women who were dealing with similar issues. We started meeting for coffee, talking about our problems, supporting each other." "And James?" She was quiet for a long moment. "James was married to one of the women in the group. When his marriage ended, he started becoming involved with some of us. Some of you. Diana first, then others. He was charming, attentive, everything our husbands weren't. And he understood what we were going through because he'd been through it himself." I tried to process what she was telling me. "So you all knew about each other?" "Yes," she whispered. "It wasn't supposed to be secretive or deceptive. It was supposed to be honest. A group of friends supporting each other through difficult times. And testing your husband's reactions to infidelity scenarios." She looked up at me with surprise. "How did you know about that?" "Because it's exactly what you did with the Emma story. You used Diana's real situation to test how I'd react to discovering an affair. The group thought it was important to understand our husbands' perspectives," she said defensively. "To know what we'd be facing if our marriages fell apart." "So you assumed our marriage was going to fall apart?" "I assumed you'd eventually get tired of being married to an HR coordinator when you could be with someone more successful, more accomplished. Someone who could match your professional achievements." The statement hit me like a physical blow. "Is that really what you think of me?" That I'm that shallow? I think you're human, she said. I think successful men have options and eventually they exercise them. My father did. Diana's husband was starting to. James's ex-wife found out the hard way. I sat back in my chair, trying to understand the worldview that had led to such an elaborate deception. In Leah's mind, she wasn't betraying our marriage. She was preparing for its inevitable end. What was the end game? I asked. How long were you planning to keep this going? I don't know, she admitted. I kept thinking I'd find the courage to end it, but James was persistent. And the other women said I was crazy to give up someone who appreciated me. Did you want our marriage to end? She looked at me with eyes full of tears. No, but I wanted to be prepared if it did. I wanted to know that someone found me attractive, that I wasn't just a placeholder until you found someone better. The twisted logic was almost heartbreaking. She'd been so afraid of being abandoned that she'd created the very scenario she was trying to avoid. What happens now? She asked. I looked at the evidence folder still sitting on the table, then at my wife of 9 years, the woman I'd planned to grow old with. I don't know, I said honestly. I need time to process all of this. That night, I slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I needed space to think clearly about what came next. The next morning, I called Frank Russo and asked if we could meet for coffee. He deserved to know that he wasn't dealing with this situation alone. We met at a diner halfway between the plant and his house. Frank looked better than he had during our lunch conversation, more resolved and less devastated. I confronted Diana, he said, after we'd ordered coffee. She admitted everything, said she was sorry, that it had gone too far, that she wanted to work on our marriage. How do you feel about that? Confused, he admitted. Part of me wants to believe her, but part of me wonders how I can ever trust her again. I pulled out one of Maria's photos, Diana with James Crawford and 2 other women, all of them looking relaxed and happy. Frank, there's something you need to know about Diana's affair. She wasn't acting alone. I told him about the network, about the shared philosophy and mutual support system. I told him about Leah's involvement and my own discovery process. By the time I finished, Frank was staring at the photo with a mixture of shock and understanding. So they all knew about each other? He asked. Yes, and they were all testing their husbands' reactions to prepare for potential divorces. Frank was quiet for a long time, studying the photograph. Diana asked me what I would do if she forgave me for an affair, he said finally. She presented it as a hypothetical question, but now I wonder if she was testing my response. Probably. Jesus, he muttered. How do you rebuild a marriage when the foundation is that rotten? It was a good question, and one I didn't have an answer for. Over the next few weeks, Frank and I stayed in touch as we both navigated the aftermath of our discoveries. He decided to separate from Diana and pursue divorce proceedings. I decided to try counseling with Leah, though I wasn't optimistic about the outcome. The counseling sessions were brutal. Leah's fears about our relationship had been simmering for months, fed by the support group's philosophy and her own insecurities about my career advancement. She'd convinced herself that cheating was inevitable in successful marriages, so she'd acted on that belief. I thought I was being smart, she said, during one particularly difficult session. I thought I was protecting myself. From what? The counselor asked. From being the naive wife who gets blindsided when her husband trades her in for a younger model. Did Gabriel ever give you reason to believe he was considering that? Leah looked at me, then back at the counselor. He started working later hours after his promotion. He talked about work more, brought home stress more often. He seemed less interested in my job, my daily life. It was true, and I acknowledged it. My promotion had come with increased responsibility and longer hours, and I had been more distracted at home. But the gap between those legitimate concerns and the elaborate affair network seemed impossibly wide. "Why didn't you talk to me about feeling neglected?" I asked during one session. "Because I was afraid you'd just promise to do better without actually changing anything," she said. "I was afraid you'd see it as nagging or neediness. So instead, you started an affair?" "I started looking for evidence that you still found me attractive and valuable," she corrected. "James provided that evidence." The counselor tried to help us work through the trust issues and communication problems, but the foundation had been too badly damaged. Every conversation felt like an interrogation. Every late night at work felt like a potential cover story. Every friendly interaction with female colleagues felt like a threat. 3 months after my discovery, we separated. Leah moved in with her sister, and I filed for divorce. The divorce proceedings were complicated by the evidence Maria had gathered. Leah's lawyer tried to argue that the affair was a symptom of marital problems rather than the cause, but the documentation of the support group's activities painted a picture of premeditated deception. In the end, we settled out of court. Leah kept her car and half of our savings. I kept the house and my retirement accounts. We divided our debts equally and agreed to no spousal support. The most difficult part wasn't the legal proceedings, it was watching our social circle implode. The revelation of the affair network affected multiple couples and friend groups. Some people took sides, others withdrew from both of us, and a few tried to maintain relationships with both parties. Sarah Kim, whose house Leah had supposedly attended book club meetings, was particularly hurt when she learned her name had been used as cover for affair-related activities. Jim Kim, Sarah's husband and my coworker, was embarrassed and angry about the deception. The ripple effects extended to Leah's workplace as well. Sullivan and Associates conducted an internal review of her HR practices after learning about her involvement in the affair network. While they didn't find evidence of professional misconduct, the scandal damaged her reputation and made her job situation uncomfortable. 6 months after our separation, Leah took a position with a smaller firm in another city. We spoke briefly before she left. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know that doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know that I never stopped loving you." "I know," I said, "but love wasn't enough to overcome the fear and deception." "If you could do it over again, would you handle things differently?" I thought about it. I would have been more attentive to your concerns about our relationship. I would have made more effort to maintain our emotional connection despite work pressures. But I wouldn't change how I handled discovering the affair. You made choices based on assumptions about my character that turned out to be wrong. She nodded sadly. "I hope you find someone who deserves the kind of loyalty you offered me." After she left, I focused on rebuilding my life. The work at the plant provided structure and purpose, and my performance during the personal crisis had earned respect from senior management. I was promoted to plant manager within the year. Frank Russo and I maintained our friendship through the divorce proceedings and beyond. We found that having someone who understood the specific betrayal we'd experienced was invaluable for processing the anger and grief. We also stayed in touch with Tom Chan, another man from the plant whose wife had been part of the affair network. Tom's discovery had come later than ours, but the pattern was the same. Fictional scenarios used to test reactions, elaborate deceptions to cover affair activities, and a support network that encouraged infidelity as insurance against marital failure. The three of us formed an unofficial support group of our own, meeting monthly for dinner and conversation. It wasn't therapy, exactly, but it was helpful to talk with people who understood the particular kind of betrayal we'd experienced. 2 years after my divorce was finalized, I met Rachel Foster at a professional development seminar. She was an accountant with her own practice, someone who understood the demands of career advancement without feeling threatened by them. Our relationship developed slowly, built on transparency and honest communication about our histories and expectations. I told her about Leah and the affair network early in our dating relationship, and she shared her own experiences with a previous marriage that had ended due to financial irresponsibility. "Do you worry that I'll cheat?" she asked me one evening over dinner. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I'm more aware of the warning signs now. And I think I'm better at addressing relationship problems before they become crises." "What would you do if you found out I was having an affair?" The question reminded me of Leah's tests, but Rachel's tone was different, genuinely curious rather than manipulative. "I'd end the relationship immediately," I said. "I learned from my marriage that trust, once broken that completely, can't be rebuilt, at least not for me." She nodded. "I think that's healthy. Some things should be deal breakers." That conversation, and many others like it, convinced me that Rachel and I shared compatible values about honesty and commitment. We married 3 years after we met, in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. Frank remarried as well, to a widow he met through his church. Tom decided to remain single, focusing on his career and his relationship with his teenage children. Occasionally, I heard updates about Leah through mutual acquaintances. She'd married James Crawford and moved to Phoenix, where he'd taken a position with a marketing firm. According to the reports, they seemed happy, though I wondered if she still worried about being abandoned for someone younger and more successful. The experience taught me several important lessons about marriage and trust. First, assumptions about your partner's character, if left unexamined, can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Leah's belief that I would eventually cheat led her to cheat first, creating the very betrayal she was trying to avoid. Second, the quality of your social network matters enormously. The women in Leah's support group reinforced her fears and encouraged destructive behavior rather than helping her address the actual problems in our marriage. Third, transparency and communication, while not sufficient to guarantee a successful marriage, are absolutely necessary. If Leah had been honest about her fears regarding my career advancement and her concerns about our relationship dynamic, we might have been able to address those issues before they became crises. Finally, I learned that some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome. The affair itself was devastating, but the elaborate deception and testing were what made the relationship impossible to repair. Trust, once destroyed that completely, can't be rebuilt on the same foundation. Looking back now, I don't regret the way I handled the situation. The investigation was necessary to understand the full scope of the deception, and the decision to divorce was the right choice for both of us. Leah needed to be with someone who shared her worldview about marriage and fidelity, and I needed to be with someone who shared my commitment to honesty and transparency. The borrowed betrayal, using Diana's real affair as a fictional test case, revealed more about Leah's character and mindset than any amount of marriage counseling could have accomplished. It showed me that she was capable of elaborate deception in service of her fears, and that she viewed our marriage as a temporary arrangement that would inevitably fail. Those weren't character flaws that could be fixed through better communication or more attention to her emotional needs. They were fundamental differences in how we viewed commitment, trust, and the possibility of lasting love. The story began with someone else's betrayal and ended with the discovery of my own wife's infidelity. But in between, I learned valuable lessons about the importance of choosing partners who share your values, addressing relationship problems honestly and directly, and recognizing when a relationship has been damaged beyond repair. Most importantly, I learned that rebuilding after betrayal is possible, but it requires starting fresh rather than trying to repair what's been irreparably broken. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go of what you thought you wanted and open yourself to what you actually need. Rachel and I have been married for 5 years now, and our relationship is built on the transparency and trust that I once took for granted. We discuss our fears and concerns openly, address problems as they arise, and maintain separate friendships and interests without secrecy or deception. It's not the marriage I once had with Leah, and it's not the naive trust I once believed was unshakable. It's something more intentional and conscious. A partnership between two people who have chosen to be honest with each other about their flaws, fears, and expectations. The borrowed betrayal taught me that some tests reveal more about the tester than the tested. Leah's fictional scenario was designed to evaluate my character, but it ultimately revealed hers. And while the discovery was devastating at the time, it led me to a life that's more authentic and fulfilling than what I had before. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. The end of my first marriage felt like a tragedy, but it was actually the beginning of a more honest and sustainable way of living and loving. The network of women who had supported each other through their affairs eventually disbanded as their marriages collapsed and their lives moved in different directions. The philosophy that had bound them together, that successful marriages inevitably fail, proved to be a self-fulfilling prophecy that destroyed the very relationships they thought they were protecting. But for those of us who survived the deception and rebuilt our lives on more solid foundations, the experience provided valuable clarity about what we actually needed in our relationships. We learned to value honesty over comfort, transparency over harmony, and authentic connection over the illusion of security. The borrowed betrayal was ultimately a gift, though it didn't feel like one at the time. It forced me to confront the difference between the marriage I thought I had and the marriage I actually had. And it led me to the relationship I needed. One built on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of trust that comes from choosing each other honestly, every day, rather than simply assuming that love is enough to overcome any obstacle. In the end, that assumption, that love conquers all, was what had made Leah's deception possible. I had trusted her completely because I loved her, never imagining that she was capable of the elaborate lies and manipulation I eventually discovered. Now I know better. Love is important, but it's not enough. Trust must be earned and maintained through consistent actions over time. Communication must be honest and direct, even when the conversations are difficult. And the assumptions we make about our partners must be regularly examined and verified through actual evidence rather than wishful thinking. These lessons, learned through the painful dissolution of my first marriage, have made my second marriage stronger and more resilient. Rachel and I don't take each other's fidelity for granted. We actively choose it, discuss it, and demonstrate it through our actions. The borrowed betrayal revealed the fragility of assumptions and the danger of unexamined fears, but it also revealed the possibility of building something better on the ruins of what was lost. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need.